So hi, I'm Ben,
I'm April.
and we're going to talk a little bit about user personas for Open Food Facts. So we all have assumptions about who the users are for Open Food Facts and why they are using Open Food Facts. But as long as we don't make that explicit, um, these can really turn into little ghosts that actually are like haunting our discussions because everybody has something different in mind. And so that's where personas come into play because by making these assumptions explicit, we can make sure that we're all aligned and that we can really focus on what our users needs, and that can actually help us make decisions better when we talk about Open Food Facts. And so as some of you may remember from last year, Pierre already shared some of the typical types of users that we have for Open Food Facts and why they actually might be visiting Open Food Facts. So here we have the citizens profiles and the different motivations that they actually might have. And so what April and I did is we really started off with basically these segments for different users. And then we started working on creating a more detailed personas. And so the way we did that is to actually use generative AI. And the reason why we did that is, of course, if we wouldn't do that, we would simply be taking our assumptions and sharing them with everybody and actually stopping there. And by using these LLMs, they actually are mining actually the collective knowledge of humanity. We can really make sure that we basically bootstrap with as much as a broad range of assumptions as possible. And so I will just kind of talk you through some of the personas that we created. So we made 7 of these personas. And maybe an important point to point out here is these are proto-personas. Because in the end, sorry, you should ideally use a lot of research to build these out. And so basically by using the AI, we bootstrap that a bit. But of course, that doesn't mean that they're fully validated in practice. So there's really like basically prototypes for personas. And we did 2 levels of details. So here you can see the typical identity card almost of a persona. And so what we have here is like basically the name of the persona. Here, Maria, the fitness foodie. So that's kind of the type of persona that we're talking about. Then we have a one-liner that really says what they're all about. So in this case, passion about a healthy lifestyle. We have some more additional motivational details. And then we have a key need and a key challenge for that particular persona. And so then we also have a more detailed card as well that kind of details this out further. It talks into brand loyalties, personal characteristics, etc., that we can take into account as well, actually. And so by creating this kind of range of detail about that persona, we really get an idea about, okay, who actually are we building the website for, and actually what would actually motivate them when they are using it, and how can we address their needs better actually going forward. And so this is our first persona here. And so for the citizens segment, we have 2 more. So here we have Liam, the conscious consumer. So while Maria is all about health, Liam is much more about actually committing to lowering his ecological footprint and actually using Open Food Facts for that. And then we have Sophie, who's sensitive to gluten and lactose. And so for her, it's a completely different use case almost of using the website. Is really for making sure that she basically doesn't wind up with an allergy, which is really like a completely different motivation. And so with these 3 different citizen personas, we try to cover the wide spectrum almost of why you as a private user would be using Open Food Facts. And then of course, most of us will be somewhere in between these personas and have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But by taking the far extremes, we can really make sure that like we cover all of these different types of people that might be using the website. And so we did the same for the producer types. Also here, like Pierre already had like bootstrapped this with some segments. And so we have 2 different producer prototypes here. One is the corporate custodian. So here's Aisha. So she leads a product development team, and she's all about brand perception and awareness. So she really tried to make sure that all the data out there is actually correct and makes her products look as good as possible. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have actually Isabel, the pioneering producer. So she actually runs an organic farm, and she really tries to compete with the Aishas of the world and tries to put her products out there as well. So it's really like where like on the one hand, you have a whole team almost working on it. Here, is you have a much more of like an individual person or a small kind of company that is also trying to kind of put their like products out there. And then we have Ko-fi, the culinary coder. It's kind of a producer profile as well, because basically they are the ones that actually build apps that might be using the Open Food Facts and to really like build on our data. So here in this case, Ko-fi, the culinary coder, he kind of creates a data-driven health app and actually uses the Open Food Facts to kind of like basically provide all that information in his app. And then finally, we have the researcher profiles, and there we have two. So we have on the one hand, we have Elena, the policy pathfinder. So she really builds out food and nutritional related policies. So that's a typical more like of a government profile who actually might be using Open Food Facts. And finally, we have Dr. Jan, the science sleuth, and he researches long-term dietary impact. It's what we already heard earlier today, like basically like these type of profiles using the Open Foods data to kind of build out their research as well. And so by having actually these 7 different proto-personas, we can really have a much better idea about who is using actually our website and why. And we can actually all align on that. And that's maybe the most important part of these personas, is to really to make sure that like whenever we have discussions and we are taking decisions, that we can actually have a much more better shared understanding of what we're doing. And as a result, that the decisions that we are making are more qualitative and actually sound in order to go forward with Open Food Facts and make it a bigger success. Now, of course, like I said, these are proto-personas. They're based on a bit of our assumptions because, of course, we had to curate a little bit what the AI was generating. And then, of course, what these AIs found out there. Of course, this means that we need to further refine these, detail them out, and actually kind of strengthen them with actual insights of that we all actually have as well. And so that's why we also plan for a workshop for today, where we can actually start working on that and also see how we would like to take this forward. All right, that's it for now.